Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into a period of Italian history that's incredibly complex, deeply tragic, and, well, pretty brutal, the Italian Civil War.
Yeah, this was fought right in the middle of World War II, basically from September 1943 through to May 1945.
And the context is crucial. Italy, just after Mussolini's fascist regime falls and the armistice with the Allies is signed, suddenly the country is just split.
Exactly. You have Italians fighting Italians, sometimes alongside, sometimes against the German occupying forces or the advancing Allied armies. It's incredibly messy.
So our mission here is to try and unpack the layers of this really tumultuous time, understand who the key players were, what drove their choices, the big events.
And, why we still talk about it, debate it as a civil war, because that term itself carries a lot of weight.
It does. It wasn't straightforward, was it?
Not at all. It was this chaotic, morally very complex period. Shifting loyalties, brutal realities on the ground. It's a lot to get into.
Okay, let's start at the beginning then. How did fascist Italy unravel to this point?
Well, the pressure was building for a while, but the Allied invasion really accelerated things.
Right, Operation Corkscrew hitting Lampedusa and Pantelleria in June 43, then Sicily in July.
And then the big one, psychologically anyway, the first bombing of Rome, July 19th. You can almost feel that sense of defeat becoming inevitable.
And that pressure caused cracks inside the regime itself.
Huge cracks, a political earthquake, really. The night of July 24th, 25th, the Grand Council of Fascism, Mussolini's own council, actually passed a no-confidence vote against him. The Grandi Agenda, it was called.
Wow. After 20 years of fascism, that's stunning.
It was. And the very next day, King Victor Emmanuel III has Mussolini arrested. Just like that. Marshal Pietro Badoglio takes over.
So what was the immediate reaction on the streets? People must have been relieved.
Oh, yeah. There were huge celebrations initially, people tearing down fascist symbols, a real sense of maybe liberation.
Yeah.
But Badoglio immediately pours cold water on that. His government announces, pretty chillingly, the war continues. Italy keeps its word.
Crushing news for people hoping for peace.
Exactly. It signals that Italy's still tied to Germany, at least publicly. This period, the 45 days after Mussolini's fall, is full of these contradictions.
How so?
While behind the scenes, Badoglio's government is secretly negotiating with the Allies for an armistice. But publicly, loyalty to Germany, they dissolve the fascist party, sure, but they keep martial law.
And they cracked down on anti-fascists.
Brutally. There were massacres of demonstrators in places like Bari and Reggio Emilia. The military orders were explicit. Open fire, even with mortars and artillery, without warning.
So for anti-fascists, it didn't feel like a clean break at all.
Not really. It felt like the old regime, maybe with a different face, but still repressive. It worried a lot of people.
But meanwhile, those anti-fascist leaders, the ones who'd been jailed or exiled, they weren't just sitting around, were they?
No way. People like Longo, Secchia, Nenni, Pertini, De Gasperi, Bonomi, they're starting to reorganize underground. They form the First Committee of National Liberation, the CLN, right there in occupied Rome, planning for what comes next.
Which brings us to the big moment, September 8th, 1943.
The Armistice of Cassibile, announced suddenly, unexpectedly over the radio, and it just unleashes chaos.
Why chaos? Wasn't an armistice what people wanted?
Yes, but there was no plan communicated to the army, to the public, and crucially, the king and Badoglio flee Rome, heading south. It looks like abandonment.
Leaving the army without orders.
Exactly. And the Germans, they were ready. They launched Operation Oxe immediately. Their plan to occupy Italy, disarm the Italian army.
And the Italian soldiers are caught completely in the middle.
Completely. Hundreds of thousands captured. Some sources say over 800,000. They face this stark choice. Collaborate with the Germans or the new fascist state being set up, or refuse.
How many refused?
Over 600,000 refused collaboration. They were imprisoned, sent to camps. It's a staggering number showing the depth of the crisis. Around 186,000 shows some form of collaboration.
So Italy is just split right down the middle.
Precisely. Politically, territorially. You've got the Kingdom of Italy in the south, what's left of it, backed by the Allies who are advancing.
Under EMGOT, the Allied military government.
Right. And in the north and center, German occupation. And under their control, Mussolini, rescued by German paratroopers, heads the new Italian Social Republic, the RSI, often called the Salo Republic.
And you also get Italian soldiers fighting with the Allies?
Yes, the Italian co-belligerent army, formed from Royal Army units in the south. So you have Italians fighting Germans, Italians fighting alongside Germans against allies, and crucially, Italians fighting other Italians.
Which is where that term civil war really comes into focus. Claudio Pavone's work really highlighted this, didn't it?
It did. His 1991 book was landmark in framing it this way, because after September 8th, everyone, soldiers and civilians, faced this immediate, often life or death choice based on where you were, your beliefs, sometimes just circumstance.
An agonizing choice, especially for soldiers. Oath to the king, alliance with Germany, fight fascism, fight communism.
A profound national trauma. So the two main armed groups within that German-occupied territory become the Italian resistance, the partisans linked to the CLN.
And the fascist forces loyal to Mussolini's RSI.
Correct. Along with that co-belligerent army fighting down south with the Allies.
And the resistance wasn't monolithic, right? It was a mix.
Oh, incredibly diverse. You had communists, socialists, the Action Party, liberals, Christian Democrats, monarchists, anarchists, all sorts, often with very different post-war visions, but united, for now, against the Germans and the fascists. They got Allied supplies, coordinated sometimes.
And the RSI side, what were their forces like?
They were trying to build an army, the National Republican Army, plus various militias. They used remnants of the old army, fascist volunteers, but also conscripts. Recruiting was hard.
I read they even offered freedom to convicts if they joined, and threatened death for draft evasion.
They did. Shows the desperation. And you had specific units like the Decima Flotilla MAS, naval commandos under Borghese, who were kind of a force unto themselves, more focused on fighting allies sometimes than strictly loyal to the RSI.
So the actual fighting, the Civil War part, was mostly partisans versus RSI forces.
Primarily, yes. Within occupied Italy, the main armed conflict was between fascist forces, the RSI army, black brigades, various militias, and the partisan groups. Clashes between the RSI regulars and the co-belligerent army were rarer, happening more along the main Allied front line. It really became this bitter war on the internal enemy.
How did the partisan movement actually get going? It must have been tough initially.
Very tough. Early groups popped up right after the armistice, places like Leves, Bosco Martes, but they often made mistakes, tried to hold ground against superior forces, got wiped out quickly.
But the CLN called for resistance.
Yes, a clear call. Fight the German invaders and their fascist lackeys. The Communist Party especially pushed for immediate aggressive action. Their line was basically, we can't just wait for the Allies, we have to free ourselves.
And that led to different tactics.
It did. You get mobile units like the Garibaldi brigades, often communist-led, and groups like the JPEG Gruppi di Azione Patriottica, who focused on urban warfare, sabotage, assassinations.
That sounds controversial.
It was. They argued they were delivering justice against Nazi-fascist terror. They targeted collaborators, spies, torturers, but the targets could be debated. Like the assassination of the philosopher Giovanni Gentile in '44. He was a prominent fascist, but maybe seen as more moderate by some. It shows how brutal and uncompromising it got.
Lines blurring very fast.
Very fast. And we have to mention the women in the resistance. Their role was absolutely vital: supplies, messages, safe houses, intelligence, and many fought as combatants too. Often overlooked, but crucial.
How many fighters are we talking about for the partisans?
Numbers fluctuated a lot, weather, German offensives, supplies, but maybe peaking around 200,000 active fighters towards the very end. Earlier, perhaps closer to 80,000 or so active in mid-1944.
And the RSI side, you said they claimed high numbers?
They claimed maybe 780,000 personnel across all units, but more reliable estimates put the total figure closer to 550,000-ish. Still a significant number, but facing a growing, increasingly effective resistance.
And within the RSI forces, there were some groups known for particular brutality.
Yes, absolutely. These sort of special groups emerged, often operating with extreme violence, sometimes including outright criminals. There was the Banda Bardi Polistrini in Rome, apparently so brutal they shocked even the Germans.
Really? Shocked the Germans?
According to some accounts, yes. Then the Banda Koch, notorious for torture in Rome and Milan. The Banda Carità in Florence and the Veneto, responsible for atrocities like the Piazza Tasso massacre.
And the Muti Action Squad in Milan.
Yes, involved in the Piazza Loreto massacre, a horrific public reprisal, executing 15 detainees after a partisan attack. These groups really embodied the darkest side of the RSI's fight.
You mentioned something earlier about an RSI conscription drive backfiring.
Ah, yes, the Graziani call-up in February '44. Marshal Graziani tried to force young men into the RSI army, but it had this unintended effect. Huge numbers of young men didn't want to fight for the RSI, so they fled. often straight into the ranks of the partisans. It actually boosted resistance numbers significantly.
A real own goal for the RSI.
Pretty much. It showed how little popular legitimacy they had.
We also hear about these partisan republics. What were they?
In spring and summer 44, when partisan activity was high in certain areas, they managed to push out the Germans and fascists and control territory for short periods. Little zones of liberation, effectively, but they were usually ephemeral, quickly crushed by German and fascist counteroffensives. Still, symbolically important.
And the fascist party itself got militarized.
Yes, under Alessandro Pavellini, the party secretary, he formed the Black Brigades, essentially militarizing party members. Pavellini called it a war of religion, indicating total commitment. They were used almost exclusively in anti-partisan warfare, known for extreme harshness. Sometimes even German commanders complained they were too brutal, destabilizing things.
It really underlines the Civil War aspect. So it's fascists versus partisans, but the Germans are always there. A three-way war, almost.
Exactly. And the German role could be ambiguous. You had instances where local German commanders might cut deals, basically telling partisans, leave our troops alone and you can deal with the fascists.
Really? Carte blanche against the fascists.
In some specific local cases, it seems so. It might have been pragmatic, trying to reduce German casualties, but it fed this idea among some partisans that the fascists were the primary, most hated enemy, even more than the Germans.
Which must have caused tension within the resistance itself.
Oh, definitely. Different political factions had different priorities, different levels of contact or conflict with the various forces. It led to suspicion, accusations, and sometimes, tragically, violence between partisan groups themselves. The Porces massacre in early 45, where communist partisans killed members of a Catholic socialist group, is a horrific example of that internal conflict.
Despite all that, the partisans were effective militarily.
Hugely effective. Field Marshal Kesselring, the German commander in Italy, estimated that just between June and August 1944, partisans inflicted at least 20,000 German casualties.
20,000 in 3 months.
Yes. Roughly 5,000 killed, maybe 8,000 captured or missing. Another 8,000 wounded, and Kesselring noted partisan losses were much lower. That's a massive impact, tying down German troops, disrupting supply lines. It was strategically vital.
Amidst all this fighting, there was another problem. Just plain crime.
Yes, and this is a really disturbing aspect. The collapse of the state, especially in RSI areas after they interned the Carabinieri police, created a power vacuum.
And criminals filled it.
Absolutely. Banditry became rampant. Robbery, torture, pillage, lynching. One newspaper at the time called it daily spiritual bread, a terrifying phrase.
That really paints a picture of breakdown.
Complete breakdown in some areas, and the lines got blurred. Some partisan groups resorted to robbery for self-financing, which led to abuses. This forced legitimate partisan commands to crack down hard on criminality within their own ranks, sometimes even executing members for theft to maintain legitimacy.
A need for self-legitimation without shadows, as Pavone put it.
Exactly. But you also had abuses and looting by Germans, especially auxiliary troops from Eastern Europe, the Ost units, and by fascist groups too. It was chaotic. Distinguishing political fighters from common criminals exploiting the chaos was incredibly hard.
You mentioned gangs using fake stamps.
Yeah, juvenile gangs using fake partisan stamps for robberies. Or groups like the Battalion de Vida, supposedly partisan but mostly bandits, who eventually switched sides and joined the SS. It wasn't just in the north either. Banditry flared up in the south too, around figures like Salvatore Giuliano in Sicily, or the Camorra resurgence in Naples, often linked to the Allied presence and black markets. This layer of pure crime just adds another tragic dimension.
Okay, let's move towards the end. Early 1945. The war in Europe is clearly ending.
Yes, the endgame is approaching. But the fighting in Italy, including the Civil War, remains intense right up to the final weeks. Interestingly, the SS commander in Italy, Karl Wolff, starts secret negotiations with the Allies in Switzerland. Operation Sunrise.
Trying to get his own deal.
Pretty much, trying to arrange a separate German surrender in Italy. And significantly, in April 45, he orders a halt to major anti-partisan operations, probably trying to curry favor.
And the Allies launched their final offensive around the same time.
Exactly. April 1945, the final push on the Gothic line. Seeing the German front collapsing, the CLN in the north decides now is the time. They call for a general insurrection across northern Italy, starting around April 19th, building to the 25th.
Mussolini, what's he doing?
He's in Milan, increasingly isolated, trying to negotiate something, maybe safe passage, but he seems disoriented, especially when he finds out about Wolff's secret talks. he feels betrayed.
And April 25th becomes the key date.
Absolutely. Liberation Day in Italy now. Sandro Pertini, future president, makes that famous radio broadcast in Milan, "Surrender or Die." The CLNAI, the Northern Liberation Committee, effectively declares itself the government, issues decrees, assumes power, and orders the death penalty for fascist leaders, including Mussolini.
So the partisans are liberating cities themselves.
Yes, in many cases. Cities like Genoa, Turin, Milan itself, partisan forces move in, often before Allied troops arrive. They secure factories, prevent destruction, capture thousands of retreating Germans and remaining fascists.
What about the RSI forces? Did they just collapse?
Largely, yes. The National Republican Guard often dissolved quickly. Some units, though, especially die-hard black brigades or groups like the Decima MAS remnants, fought on fiercely or tried to retreat towards Germany. Interestingly, even the Guardia di Finanza, the financial police, in Milan, sided with the insurgents.
And Mussolini's final moments play out then.
They do. He flees Milan on April 25th, trying to get to Switzerland or Germany. He's captured near Lake Como on the 27th by partisans.
And executed.
Executed the next day, April 28th, along with his mistress Claretta Petacci and other fascist leaders. Their bodies were then taken to Milan and infamously displayed in Piazza Loreto.
The same place as that fascist massacre a year earlier.
Exactly, a deliberate, symbolic act of retribution.
Which brings us to that really difficult period right after the fighting stops, the post-war violence, the showdown.
Yeah, it's a very dark and contested chapter. In the immediate aftermath, with the state still not fully functional, emotions running incredibly high. There were widespread summary executions, improvised courts, rough justice, score settling.
Were the Allies aware? Did they intervene?
They were aware. Their reaction varied. Some commanders seemed to turn a blind eye for a short period. There's a quote from an English colonel, supposedly telling partisans, "You clean up for 2-3 days, but on the third day, I don't want to see dead people on the streets anymore."
A sort of grim pragmatism?
Perhaps. There was certainly a desire among some resistance figures, especially on the left, for a radical purge before, as they saw it, the old elites or bourgeois legality could reassert itself and protect collaborators. Giorgio Agosti used that phrase.
Getting accurate numbers for how many were killed in this period seems impossible. The estimates are all over the place.
They are incredibly varied, and that itself tells you something about how contested this history is. You see figures from maybe 1700 cited by a minister right after the war, up to these huge numbers, like 300,000 claimed by neo-fascist sources later on.
300,000? That seems astronomically high.
It was. And the person who originated that figure, Guglielmo Gianni, later admitted it was basically a well-engineered lie for political propaganda. That admission is crucial. It shows how the memory of this violence has been actively manipulated.
So what do serious historians estimate now?
More careful studies suggest figures like, Guido Kreins talks about maybe 9,300 killed or disappeared for clear political reasons, plus other violence linked to social conflict or just general lawlessness. Hans Wöhler suggests around 12,000 in 1945, maybe another 6,000 in 1946, as things slowly calmed down.
And Ferruccio Pari, a resistance leader himself, estimated higher.
Cillier Bertoldi cites Pari estimating around 30,000. It's still a wide range. And the victims weren't just uniformed fascists. They included civil servants, businessmen, priests, people accused of being anti-communist, victims of personal vendettas, even people killed by common criminals exploiting the chaos. Pari himself condemned the illegal executions while he was prime minister.
So the formal end comes with the German surrender.
Yes, the surrender at Caserta covers all German forces in Italy, effectively ending the Italian campaign and the Civil War on May 2nd, 1945.
What was Italy like right after this, the immediate aftermath?
Devastated, economically ruined, infrastructure destroyed, and society was just fractured, deeply divided by everything that had happened, and there was huge anger towards the monarchy.
For its role with Mussolini in the flight from Rome?
Exactly. King Victor Emmanuel III was seen as deeply compromised. He abdicated in May 46, hoping his son Umberto II could save the monarchy.
But it wasn't enough.
No, the pressure was too great. A referendum was held on June 2nd, 1946. Italians voted to abolish the monarchy and establish a republic.
A fundamental change born out of this conflict.
Absolutely. Though the new republic remained under Allied military government until the peace treaty in 1947.
So looking back at this whole deep dive, it's clear the Italian Civil War was much more than just a sideshow to World War II.
Oh, far more. It was this profound internal trauma, Italian against Italian, shaped by fascism, the shock of the armistice, the occupation, the fight for liberation. It forced this massive reckoning with justice, vengeance, national identity, and the transition from dictatorship to democracy was incredibly violent and difficult.
It really was. And thinking about that period, the complete collapse of state authority we talked about, the way political violence blurred with revenge and just outright crime, makes you wonder, doesn't it? What does that chaos tell you about how societies cope or fail to cope when the normal structures just disappear? And what kind of challenges does that leave for rebuilding trust and order afterwards? Something for you, the listener, to maybe ponder.